Jonathan Pageau, it's an absolute honor to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, it's great to we've talked before a few times, kind of in groups and in like short moments. So it's good to have a sustained conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was wondering, could you just maybe tell everybody who you are and what you're about, what you do?
And so my name is Jonathan Pageau. I am mostly I find it harder and harder to describe what it is that I'm doing, but I would say that I'm mostly an artist. I carve icons and I'm knowledgeable about kind of Christian iconography. And in general, I would say I see how the patterns that I find in art and in scripture apply to the world. And so with that, I have a podcast I make a series of videos on symbolism. And so I would say that's mostly what I do, a mix of making art and then talking about the patterns of reality.
Awesome. And so you have the Symbolic World. It's been an honor to be a contributor as a writer and be able to post a few articles, as well as several others that are getting on to the collective of what's happening. I'm just wondering, with the Symbolic World, can you describe why you picked that name and how it's matching with what you're doing?
Well, it's kind of the idea of symbolic world is there's two-pronged attack, you could say, in calling it the symbolic world. One is trying to talk about the world of symbolism and try to awaken people to a different way of viewing things, a different way of seeing the world as full of pattern, full of meaning, and the inevitability of meaning is something that I insist upon a lot. How because we have to see the world through patterns, we can't avoid meaning. The world will just present itself to us through patterns. So that's on one side, and then the other hand, it's also symbolic world in the sense of trying to help people understand that because of this, then the world is symbolic. So it's both the world of symbolism and the idea that the world appears to you as symbolic, and so you can't avoid those two sides. So I usually get like at first people were accusing me, or not accusing me, but were suspecting that I was trying to explain away scripture or traditional ideas by saying they were symbolic, and therefore that they didn't happen or that kind of stuff. But it's in fact what I'm trying to explain is that no, anything that happens has to be symbolic for an event to even present itself as having some kind of coherence to you. It needs to lay itself out in a pattern, and that's the pattern of everything. And so in scripture and in some stories you see it more concisely, but it's there in your life, and it's there in your everyday activities, it's there in your breathing, it's there in whatever it is that you can conceive as having identity.
Yeah, I just love the title because every time I say it, I think of like Jurassic Park. You are now entering, Jurassic
Symbolic
World.
world.
Yeah. And I
Well,
see
I
these
kind of
like,
present it like that also in the videos, because I have that little opening where I say "Welcome to the symbolic world."
yeah.
And the thing that is funny about that opening is that one of the reasons why I made that opening was so that I could say my name, and because my name is French, and English people can't read my name. If they see my name, they think like Pageau, Pageau, Pageau. They have no idea. And so I thought I need to, if I make videos, I have to say my name at the beginning so that it starts to like people start to just know how my name is said. And so that's one of the reasons why that
It's the
opening is like that.
establishment of identity in language.
Exactly. I'm like, I want my name to be properly
I
manifested
totally, I
in.
totally sympathize because my last name, goodness gracious, Fiedler. You could only imagine
That's
all of the
right.
different pronunciations I've gotten today.
That's right. That's true. I guess people could say Fiedler or all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Maybe I need to change my intro because right now the name just kind of flashes and it's like, no, maybe I should say it like Jonathan Pageau so people
That's
actually
right.
know what the heck my name is. I really like the symbol or the image that you use with it. I was wondering, could you maybe describe why you picked that symbol and what it is and the deeper meaning behind it?
So it's an image from a psalter, a German psalter, medieval German psalter. I think it's around 12th century, maybe 13th century. I'm not sure exactly. And it just represents the creation. And so it's actually a kind of a schematic vision of the 6 days of creation, 7 days of creation. So 6 days plus the creation of man. But it really is 6 days, but it's like 6 days, but the 6th day is also the central day that is the creation of man. And it's a really powerful fractal image because it has in it kind of the structure of the Genesis story. I've always keep telling people I'm going to make a video to explain the symbolism. So it has the 6 days laid out. You can look at it well. You'll notice that the first 3 days are kind of reflected in the second 3 days. So they're actually manifesting the same pattern in fractally. That's what it's like. That's what it's like in Scripture. The first 3 days and the last 3 days are kind of mirror reflections of each other. And then at the end, in the center, you have the creation of man. But what's interesting is that it's not the creation of man. It's actually the creation of Eve. If people who have watched my channel will notice that I actually talk about feminine symbolism quite a bit. People are trying to toss that symbolism aside to the great detriment of society, both men and women, and both people who call themselves feminists actually look down upon the feminine aspect of reality, or what was traditionally known as feminine. So I really like the idea that in that image you see Eve kind of awakening.
The 7th day is actually Eve. Okay.
Well, it's the 6th day, really, and that's why if you look at the image, you'll notice that the 6th day has like a little opening, and then you can see how they're connected together. It's quite ingenious the way the artist did it. It has like a little opening on the feet, and then you can see that it's kind of showing that it's a blow up of the little one. It's like 6 days, and it's as if this 6th day now is like opened up as the center, exposing the center of what this process is.
That reminds me of some of the maps that Matthew Pageau, your brother, displayed in his Language of Creation book, where it's like how do you call it? The cosm, macrocosm, microcosm, and then each one of those, like the same pattern, is just at a smaller scale, but it still plays out.
That's exactly what's happening in that image. It's happening at several layers. It's a very, very ingeniously thought out image. The person who did it had quite a bit of intuition. So that's why I liked it so much. I've liked it for a very long time, that image, and so I thought right away that I wanted to have it. And so the idea of emphasizing creation and the script in Genesis. If people who watch my videos will know that I really focus a lot on that symbolism. I tend to go back to the first chapters of Genesis as kind of like the pattern making. You can imagine it almost like as if the Bible has this first part, which is really this enunciation of the patterns. It's almost like a fugue, like a Bach fugue, where you have the theme, which is announced at the beginning. Then you have like a kind of variation on the themes, which appears all through Scripture, where they're repeated, set against each other. There's this interplay of the pattern. It kind of opens up, and then at the end in Revelation, it's restated at a higher level, where the first image of the garden is now the last image of the garden with the city, and this kind of glorious moment where everything comes together and death is destroyed, and all the problems that were said about in the first chapter are kind of resolved. So
that's so interesting, because I'm reading through Echoes of Exodus by Alistair Roberts, and he starts out right at the very beginning saying we need to read the scripture musically. And he has like his beginning chapter, man, is just absolutely fantastic, where, like you said, it's like you take all of these different elements of music and you look at the motif and melody and how those play out, and that's really what's happening in the written form, or a linguistic form, in the biblical text.
Well, the ancients, when they use the word music, so for example, if you look at the classical curriculum, one of the elements was music, and so you would think that music just meant singing or just meant learning to play an instrument, but it's not clear that that's what it meant. It seems to mean a lot more. When we talk about the music of the spheres, for example, like in a Pythagorean sense, then we're actually not just talking about sound in the sense of what you hear, but it's actually the perception of pattern. And so music, it's almost like pure pattern. That's what music is. It's one of the closest thing to a mathematical formula that you can experience is to recognize amongst abstract sounds a pattern. It's pretty amazing.
The way that Neil said it in our conversation was that music presents reality, or it presents that which is beyond our five senses.
Yeah, that's what it does. And it does it. And there's a priority of sound in scripture. And I think that it's probably not just in scripture. It might be a universal thing, because sound is invisible, and it's experienced. The causality of sound is not easy to perceive, right? So when you see something, you can see it like happening, right? And so the causality is there in front of you, but sound kind of drops in, from above, let's say, and it's carried by wind, and it's carried by spirit, basically, and it also comes from the person's mouth, so it carries meaning directly. And so the idea of sound and singing, let's say, as being the primordial language, is something that you find in many cultures. You find that in there's a lot of early kind of mythological type texts that will talk about, singing as the song, the world was sung into being, or that, the idea of the language of the angels, for example, is like the language of the birds, and it's this singing that comes from the heavens.
Wow. Okay, so that's so interesting, because what Roberts is laying out in his book Echoes of Exodus is that you take like certain elements, like say meter and rhythm, and with meter, that would phenomenologically, or in the course of a regular day, that would be like one day after next turns into a week, turns into a month. It's very consistent, it's very steady, it's calculated. But then you have rhythm, where say you have like holidays and birthdays and festivals and Thanksgiving and Easter and etc. And that creates like a rhythm, right? But then within that, whenever we sit down and have a meal, or if we have Eucharistic communion, and we remember, we're tying it transcends that day meter regular rhythm, or excuse me, that regular meter, and you're able to tie and connect several generations back, 2,000 years back, and also know that you're going to be tying with people in the future. So whenever you sit down to Thanksgiving, you have this remembrance that transcends time. At least, am I off with that?
That's the whole structure of eschatology in Christianity. It has a metaphysical function. People just think that it's all about just what's going to happen in the future, but that's not really what's going on in Christian eschatology, or in eschatology in general, not just Christian eschatology, because most religions have an eschatology. It's mostly about what you're saying. It's about the idea of, on the one hand, remembering the past, but also remembering the future. And we're not used to thinking that way, but you need to understand memory simply as distance from something. And so you can have distance. And so, for example, like if I remember my wife, it doesn't mean that she's still not around. It's not about the past, it's just about distance. She could be in my house and I can remember her because she's just not with me at the moment. And so you can remember the future as well. And so that moment of memory, the liturgical moment, or like you said, the Eucharistic moment, becomes this thing that transcends time, or compresses time into a point of participation, which is both remembering, let's say, the body of Christ, which was given, on the cross, but it's also remembering the last judgment, remembering the final resolution of the whole story, when we are all together, when all has been revealed and everything is in communion, and even in the Orthodox liturgy, we say that. We think it's interesting, because there's a moment just before, very close to the actual communion moment, where we thank God for things. And we say, we thank God for it's like the birth, the life, the death, the resurrection of the dead, the ascending into heaven, the sitting on the right hand of the Father, and the last and final judgment. And we thank God for something as if it's something that's happened, but we're thanking him for the final judgment, which is still to come. And so it's like you said, this moment of not just memory, but gratefulness for the things that, the things that are before, the things that are coming. And so that is this amazing possibility of ritual and of communion.
Yeah, it's like the grand crescendo. It's kind of like
Yeah, exactly.
so like if you look at the deliverance in the stories of Exodus and with Moses and the people going out of Egypt and into the Promised Land eventually, you see those being repeated or echoed during the life of Christ or in several stories in between. But then it's not like it's complete there, because even at that moment, it, like you said, it points to call it the grand overture or the grand conclusion that's still yet to come. And even then, that end is still just a beginning of something even grander to come.
Yeah, and that's what it kind of like when it feels like. When you read St. Gregory of Nyssa, he really talks about theosis. When the way that he talks about deification is not a status. We tend to think of let's say heaven or paradise as kind of the static joining. It's like you see it in the caricature. It's like you sit on a cloud with a harp, and it's like, okay, you're there. What are you going to do now? But rather the image that St. Gregory gives, and I think someone like C.S. Lewis.
Hey, that's quite the slip.
Someone like C.S. Lewis says it's like this. It's actually a kind of infinite entering or an infinite dynamic process. Where you actually join with God, and it becomes this kind of infinite dynamic process of entering into God. So
yeah. Okay. So when you were talking about yesterday, today, and forever, we could say, it makes me wonder, what is the nature of prophecy? Okay, so like for example, last year, just a practical example, 2020, you come out and you say, this is going to be a crazy year, guys, it's going to be a clown year. And you went on to describe things that in large part happened. And so I'm wondering, in light of that, what would you say is the nature of prophecy? Is it pulling out the patterns and having this, being able to understand because of how you've seen it be done before, you can start seeing the genesis of that and you're like, oh, I know how this is going to end? Or is it revelation? Like, how would you describe that?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by prophecy. I think the thing about prophecy is that it's actually a very wide. How can I say this? It's quite a wide field in the sense that prophecy isn't just about predicting the future. Clearly not. It is definitely when you see the visions that the prophets have or the visions that they describe, they're describing these cosmic patterns. And what they're doing is that they're applying it to, it's because it's like anything. If you know the pattern of something, you can somehow predict it, and it's something that you could do you could probably do, like when I did that, it's not like I had this vision, that it's not like I was lying in my bed and all of a sudden the sky opened up and I saw 2020. It's just because it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. It's like, if you've seen a glass fall from a table several times, once you start to see a tip, you can say what's going to happen. So, but I do think that, for example, the prophecies that are in Scripture are at a higher level. Like if you read the prophecies of Ezekiel, it's clear that Ezekiel had some massive connection to the source. Like he was definitely seriously connected and was seeing into the life of God. When Ezekiel sees the divine chariot which comes down and the presence of God which descends on the four beasts, it's not about the future so much as about this actual perceiving the structure of everything and the temple and the paradise and all of these things coming together in a vision which is showing him what reality is ultimately, and not only showing it to him but making him participate in it. So I think that's probably that's the highest level of prophecy. It's even almost like it's like a transformational thing. When the angel of God touches the lips of the prophet with a flaming coal, it's like that's not just a thing. That's a transformation of the person. This is someone becoming, coming close to the divine fire and being transformed by it. It's not just like someone who is I think that's one of the problems people have too, is when they kind of think of a vision, they think it's just some random person, and then God showed them things as if like opened a book to them and just said, here's what's going to happen, folks. But that's not what if you read, that's not what's going on. Like, these people are being pulled into into a intense, powerful transformation of their person as they're experiencing this pattern as well.
Funny you bring up Ezekiel. That's the name of my new son.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, he's turning 4 months old shortly.
Nice. That's amazing.
Yeah. So
how many kids you have? I don't even know how many kids you have.
I have 2. Yeah, I'm a very proud father of a 3-year-old girl named Abigail and a 4-month-old son named Ezekiel.
That's awesome.
Okay, so here's the thing, Jonathan, is that my wife decided the name of our son over 2 decades ago. She's like, I'm going to name my son Ezekiel Joel, when she wasn't even a teenager yet. And then around that time, I had a piano teacher that was very influential. His name was Easy Andrews. And so at that point, I was like, man, I really like that name, Easy. And so I think you can't just put EASY on a birth certificate. That's kind of awkward. So Ezekiel would be like the closest name I could think of that I could like borrow that nickname. So the nickname came first and then Ezekiel in my case. But that decision happened over 2 decades ago. And then, so the 2 of us meet, we come together, and we get married about, 5 years ago this year? Wow, 5 years ago. And so we had already decided if we're going to have a son, his name's going to be Ezekiel Joel, Joel being my middle name. And a lot of people might think that is a really weird name. First of all, Ezekiel is not that common, and it's a kind of like a freaky, odd book in the Bible, right? Because you start out with like 10 chapters of, could be like, some people even make the case it's like a UFO DMT trip or something, And then
Ezekiel is one of the most intense books in Scripture. Like, next to Revelation, it's probably one of the most intense.
Oh yeah, and it's so diverse too, because then the next section is just woe, prophecies of woe, woe, woe. This is bad things going to happen. Watch out, watch out. So it's cautionary telling. But then it ends with like a verbal architecture of how the new temple is going to be built. So it's like super practical stuff. And you're like, what the heck? This is the same
but that's
book?
more than practical. That's actually a cosmic vision too. It
yes.
follows the structure of Revelation. It's basically the final temple that he's describing is really like a version of the church, but it's also like a version of the final vision of St. John when he sees the heavenly city, but how it's connected also to the vision of the altar and because if you read what happened in Revelation, it's a liturgical text. It's describing like a ritual that's happening in heaven, and Ezekiel had a glimpse of that, and so a lot of the symbolism of the early Christians end up being related to Ezekiel, which is something people don't understand very much. For example, the earliest churches were the opposite of our churches. Like the earliest churches in Rome had the altar in the west, and they would have the holy place in the west, whereas we have now all traditional churches have the holy place in the east. So they had the holy place in the west because that's what the temple. In the temple in Scripture, the holy place is in the east. No, it's in the west. Sorry. So you can imagine like the glory of God coming from the east and settling in the west. So it's like it's like the west is like a seat, and then the east is like the source, and then they kind of connect together. And in Scripture, it talks about this closed gate. Ezekiel talks about this sealed gate in the east, and how that is the gate that the Messiah is going to come through. Is the sealed gate in the east. And so now think of when you look at an Orthodox church, what you see in the apse. You see the Mother of God like this, and you see Christ coming through her center. And she's the sealed gate. That's why they have that. She's the sealed gate in Ezekiel, and here comes the Messiah through the sealed gate. So the early Christians, St. Augustine talks about how the early Christians would be turning west, like in the temple, and then at some point when, like, let's say this moment of communion and Eucharistic moment, they would turn west. They would turn east. I keep flipping it. Sorry. They would turn east and then look to the coming Christ, like look to the coming Christ who's coming. And then finally, it ended up that the whole architecture ended up flipping, where it's like, well, we're actually going to turn east all the time. This is part of the confusion in the Catholic Church of the whole idea of whether the priest looks at the people or looks towards the altar or looks toward the apse. It's because in the early Roman Church, the priest would be looking at the people, but the priest would always be facing east. The priest would be facing east, the people would be facing west. Then at some point during the service, the people would turn east, and they would all be facing east. Then what it ended up being is that they said, no, let's just always face east. And so now the priest is facing east, and the people are facing east. So you end up looking at the back of the priest, but they're always facing towards this glory, which is coming. So the glory is coming, and it's manifesting itself on us, because we're the ark now, right? It's us. We're the one waiting for the glory to come down upon us, and so it's like we have to face east. Anyways,
what do you mean
part
by
of the symbolism?
What do you mean by that? That we are the ark?
Well, we are the body of Christ. We are the body of God. We are the temple. We are the new temple, and so we have to have the same. We have the same pattern as the temple itself, and so it ends up actually creating this interesting transformation in the holy space of the Christians, which is that, you know, it's not just like the seat of God, which is waiting for the glory to come down upon it. It's like it's you. The glory comes down on you. It doesn't just come down on the altar. You also receive that. You also participate in that, you know, in that transformation. Like if you read St. Maximus the Confessor, he talks about how an aspect of deification is the actual participation in communion. When you take communion and you participate in the liturgy, you are deified, even if you don't fully realize it and you don't completely, let's say you also need to have that transformation kind of fully realized in you, but it's a process that's already happening as you're participating in this pattern.
Wow, man, it just seems like every single subtle movement that happens in a liturgical service is just imbued with meaning.
Yeah, well, yes, I would say that's sometimes people overdo it, but I would say that it's, I mean, obviously, you know, when things start to have meaning, sometimes there's a kind of insanity which can also kind of settle in, and everything kind of, you start to get paranoid about every detail because you don't, if you struggle to know what's truly meaningful and what is kind of secondary. And so sometimes meaning gets attached to things which are a little secondary, but that usually that process organically sorts itself out. You know, people get like obsessed with little details and then they kind of let them go after a while.
But I got to say, man, your description of Ezekiel is super helpful. And it's even helping me as a dad understand my son and why he's named as Ezekiel at all. Because like, I just think about it, like we had the opportunity in 2017, which is about the same time that Jordan Peterson, like in his controversies just exploded, around the time you came out with the Pepe the Frog video. And yeah, I guess the Symbolic World was ushered forth to a large extent. But we didn't have a son then. We had a daughter and we named her Abigail. And gosh, I'm even thinking back now that it was so significant because of the story of Abigail and just what a picture of womanhood she is and the strength of the feminine. But then 3 years later, it turned out that we ended up having our son October of 2020. And Ezekiel Joel was birthed and named. And I just think of, out of all the time during my lifetime, to have him show up and name him that, what better time than October of 2020 with all the things that were going on?
It's not necessarily, it's you know, sometimes we have to recognize the darkness, like, as well. Like, it's like we're naming the same with my son is Elisha, you know, and it's the same. It's like we totally, like, I was very much aware that naming my son Elisha was a recognizing of the dark times, like a recognizing of the moment when, you know, the king has been seduced by the the harlot, and that the world is is not doing well, let's say. And so, but then Elisha is part of bringing about the resurrection. That's
Right.
why
He's the new
all
Joshua in a lot of ways,
he's
right?
like setting the world back.
Hmm.
Does all his miracles have to do with kind of setting the world back, making the axe head float or healing the king. All of these things that he's doing is clearing the old world. Some of it is pretty intense, like the story of the she bear, but then also raising the axe head, raising the top of the hierarchy from getting it from the bottom of the waters and making it appear so we can see it again.
Now, are you saying Elijah with a J or Shah
No,
with
it's
an SH?
Elisha. It's not
Oh,
Elijah.
hmm.
It's Elijah's disciple. It's
Right.
the
So in
one who
that
gathered
case,
his mantle and then went about the dirty work of kind of of restarting the thing in a dark world.
oh man, that's so interesting. I was just reading that in Alistair Roberts' book because he talks about the echoes, right? To complement what you and your brother are doing with symbolism, he's saying an echo would be kind of like a cover, let's say a band that's covering a song. So like the same components are there, but there's still newness. There's unique components as well. And so,
Yeah, because Elisha repeats a lot of the things that Elijah did,
yeah, I mean, it crosses
and
the Jordan, you
that's right.
know?
Yeah, exactly. Crossing the Jordan is really important in Scripture. It has to do with this transition. It always has to do with a transition from one world to the other, and it's important to understand that because that's also what the Christ's baptism is, and that's also why that's what even John's baptism is. Right? It's repentance. It's like here's you out in an old world. Get rid of this old world. Now you're entering a new world, and then Christ makes it into a cosmic version of that where crossing the ark across, having the ark cross the Jordan, going towards the promised land is this, this kind of moving into the holy place. But it also goes the other way. There's also the crossing the Jordan, going away from Israel is also important. And you see that in a lot of stories, like even like stories like the story of St. Mary of Egypt, where this idea that they cross the Jordan and go out into the desert, and then they're kind of out in the desert, and then there are the trials of the desert there. So yeah,
Yeah, because
it's
even
important.
John to Christ would be very similar to Moses to Joshua, Elijah to Elisha, right? I
Yeah,
mean, like even their names are like God saves, the Lord saves, God saves.
yeah. Well, you can see that that's the structure that is being kind of shown in terms of sort of John and Jesus, because Elijah has the mantle, and then it's like what's passed down to Elisha is a double. It's a double. What is it, like a double version of his spirit? I don't know how to say it in English. Like a what is it, like a double scoop or whatever? Like a double. Twice the spirit of Elijah, let's say. And so you can imagine that accumulating, almost like it accumulates all the way till John, and then John is the greatest prophet according to the New Testament. He's the final prophet. He's like the last prophet in that line of prophets, and then he hands it off to someone who there's no handing off afterwards. Like there's no more handing off. You can imagine this handing off of the mantle down, this garment of skin that Elijah hands down, gets handed down, and then finally you come to Christ. It's like this is it. Like this is the last one. This is the one that cinches it all. And so it happens in the Jordan, this crossing of the Jordan, and it's also John recognizing him as being higher than him. So all of that is definitely happening. And it's also related to Moses not entering into the promised land and Joshua entering into the promised land, all of that, where it's like Moses has to stay back and then Joshua is the one who goes in. And so it's like the same with John. John announces the kingdom, and then Christ brings the kingdom into the world.
Yeah. So in light of my son, Ezekiel, and your
Ezekiel.
son, Elisha,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what's in store for 2021, Jonathan?
I don't want to, it's really not going to get any better, guys. I hope everybody's ready for that. It's getting very much worse. And so one of the things that's happened is like it is playing out as a fractal, and it's playing out. So you can think that in 2016, right, in the Jordan Peterson moment, and something broke. Like there's something that really broke during the election of Donald Trump, but it was happening at the level of the institutions, like the teaching institutions. So I don't know if you remember in 2016. There was Jordan who came out of the university to speak out, and then the universities were kind of exploding around him, and all these demonstrarations and all this chaos.
Oh man, I was a student at UC Davis when that was happening, so that was very real for me.
So there's Jordan, but it wasn't just Jordan. It was like Ben Shapiro and Milo and
Weinstein
all these
as
people,
well.
Gavin McGinnis, and all these people who were going to talk to on campuses, and the campuses would like explode, and people are like, "What is happening on these campuses?" Right? So Jordan said, "This is a dangerous time. This is dangerous. It's coming." And then what happened is that in 4 years, it actually had a fractal jump where it moved from one level of reality to the next, and now it's a countrywide situation. So your country, the United States, is what the universities were 4 years ago, and so that's why the protests, the explosion happened in all the major cities, and it was no longer just on campuses or at Berkeley in these little university towns. Now it's like now.
I mean, they even said that. They said how the universities go, so go the nation. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but you can see it. You're seeing it play out. And so now with Biden elected, he right away signaled that he was going to be that president in the first week. He signaled that he was going down an authoritarian line in terms of the authoritarian acceptance, you could call it. It's such a strange world where all of a sudden the inclusion is authoritarian. That's it's the 666 symbolism that I talk about sometimes. This idea of authoritarian inclusion. And so we're going down that line, and it's not slowing down; it's speeding up radically. And so that's going to be weaponized. It's already weaponized. We see it, but it's going to get weaponized more and more. And so I don't expect anything pretty in 2021 or in the next few years.
Do you have any insights as far as the GameStop scandal and what's happening there?
I mean, I think that the one thing that it's exposing for sure is, it is exposing the problem of the whole system. It's like the whole system is the market itself is this idea of just the market is a really problematic thing. Because Jordan Peterson is really a capitalist, really. I'm actually not a capitalist. I'm not a socialist either. I just think that economy has to be submitted to higher principles. So I'm not saying that that's what's important to me. The other stuff is secondary, but this focus on market, just on the market, and this because you focus just on the market, you make it into this weird idiosyncratic thing, which gives you a lot of power, but then can also becomes extremely fragile. And so the idea that certain factions can weaponize that, it's just another sign of the breakdown. It's just another sign of the breakdown. It's just accelerating it. And so I'm not saying that people should or shouldn't do it, because I understand the elites have been gaming the system and weaponizing it to their advantage for the past decades, So I don't care that people are doing it, but I can see that it's accelerating the breakdown and what it's calling for. And people don't realize that revolution always calls for more authority. That's what a revolution is. And that's why every time someone does a revolutionary move and is then surprised to watch the guillotine come down afterwards, it's like, how many times in history does it have to happen for you to see that revolution calls for authoritarianism? That it just does. So from the French Revolution to Napoleon, from the Russian Revolution to Stalin, etc., etc., etc. Revolution calls for authoritarianism. Even the Roman Revolution. People forget that Julius Caesar presented himself as a revolutionary, as someone who was gaming the system. If you know your Roman history, he was gaming the system. He was using loopholes in the legal system to get his agenda to be taken, right? He would go straight to one legislative body and try to get it pushed through that, and then what it led to is the emperor. And so
now, do you think it's significant that the platform that they used to buy the stock was entitled Robinhood?
Yeah, Robinhood and GameStop. The GameStop is wonderful. It's like such a wonderful Symbolism happens moment.
Oh man,
where it's like that's what's gonna happen. It's like they're investing in GameStop. They're actually trying to break the system. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose, but they're actually using the rules of the game in a way that will destroy the game. And so that's why people are scared, and they're scared of what's going on. And the weird Robin Hood moment was also hilarious because, it's like Robin Hood becoming the sheriff of Nottingham was what people were saying. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was just hilarious.
You can't even just make that up, man. You really can't.
No, you can't. Right now, the thing about right now, at least, is that the things that are happening right now are more interesting than any story you could tell, like any fictional story.
Yeah, like Symbolism Happens was like a cute thing at first, but now it's just like, oh my gosh, this is like, I don't even need to watch TV anymore. Like
exactly, like look at the characters: Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, AOC. In the United States, the characters are way more interesting than anything you can watch in fiction. But to watch them like play against each other is just.
Oh yeah, as far as like the Symbolism Happens at like the dramatic like soap opera level. But then I'm also thinking like with the story of Robin Hood. So of course it's popular or popularized as like this revolutionary figure, steal from the rich and give to the poor. But if you keep watching or keep reading that story, it's the return of the king.
That's what
it is. That's the point of Robin Hood, is it not?
That's the whole point of Robin Hood, and so if you watch my videos, my more recent videos, especially even like some of my recent Patreon videos, and now the one I did on Batman, I'm starting to try to lay out for people what it means to kind of be a hero in an upside down world, and also how to act in a world where the authority is corrupt. And so we have examples. Robin Hood is a really good example. Batman in the story that I tell is a good example. King David's a good example before he becomes king, because he actually joins with a band of brigands. Like he joins.
Oh, that's the story of Abigail, right there. 1 Samuel 25. Right, he's a bandit. He's about to go wipe out her husband, Nabal, the fool, and he's interceded by the feminine, right?
That's right.
Who turns his aggression
for her husband.
Yeah. And so because if another masculine figure would have tried to an army against an army, there would have been chaos and death and destruction, and someone would have got wiped out, probably Nabal the fool. But because the feminine came in with subtlety and grace, she very heroically was able to calm down David's fire, and then eventually she's glorified as queen.
Yeah, but you see, like David's wives are really important to understand who David is and how David is a weird kind of how David is like a messianic figure who's doing a lot of things at the same time, a lot of strange things. The fact that David marries foreign women, like all his wives are other people's wives, basically, or either other people's wives or like the daughter of his enemy. It's like it's all about this weird flip that he does where he has this, it's all like this strange, like, how can I say this, like fermenting of scandal and of marrying your enemy, and it's like all of this stuff. It's almost like you can see the story of Jesus not fully realized, like not fully finished. That's one of the interesting thing about a lot of the Old Testament characters is like you look at it and you say, if you look objectively at the characters, you can see that, for example, the idea that David marries the foreign, like marries the let's say the daughter of his enemy, and that marries also, this woman in a very disturbing way, like the loose woman that he marries, so he marries a loose woman, and then he also marries the daughter, the woman of his enemy, and so it's like, it's like that's what Christ does too. Right? Christ does that. Like Christ marries Rome. Christ marries the he ends up moving out towards the foreign. He integrates the foreign. That's what Christ does. Like until then, Israel is about the nation and about, the descendants of Abraham and the revelation of Moses. And then Christ comes and says, yes, this and this. And he's like, now it's all in. Like everything is gonna get dealt with. And so he both marries. So he both has in early iconography there was the two churches. So it's like the church of the circumcised and the church of the Gentiles. And so the image of like the virgin in the sense of Mary as the virgin, and then the Mary as the whore. So there are the two Marys, you could say, the Virgin Mary and the whore Mary. And you can see it like it's actually not even in scripture, but it ends up like manifesting itself, even if it's not clearly in scripture. Because like Mary Magdalene, for example, the idea that Mary Magdalene is the prostitute or the loose woman who washes Christ's feet, that's not in scripture. That's like that's a later tradition. It's not there at all. Like, you can't even find it in scripture. But it's like this character has to kind of come together of the whore and the virgin as being the two aspects. And so King David is like every like story in the Old Testament where you see someone ends up marrying like a foreign woman, and then there's this weird thing happening there, is related to this thing that Christ is ultimately going to do, like Moses and the Ethiopian woman, Samson even, and the foreign woman. And so it's like all of this discussion is what's going on. And so it's like, and finally you have Christ and the Samaritan who like offers her the water. He's offering her his source, which is referred to in Proverbs as basically, it's talking about sexual union in Proverbs. It says, what does it say? It's like, keep your fountain for yourself. Don't let it, go into the streets, and don't give your water to the foreign woman. And it's like, that's what Christ is doing. Christ is doing exactly that. He can integrate it all. Like there's nothing stopping Christ in any way. Anyway, sorry, that was a weird rant. Like all this.
No, let's keep it going, man. So that brings us to the symbolism of sex, Mr. Pageau.
Oh yeah, let's try to talk about that.
So
how do you want what angle?
You just basically you walked right into where in Language of Creation, your brother's book, it talks about call it the two halves of feminism, right, in this part of the equation, where sexually speaking, a woman is part procreation, and then it's also part pleasure, right? So you could think of a woman that is a wife, and she's a good mother of children, but then there's also this part where she also has to embrace this pleasure side as well. It's the familiar and the foreign, I believe it was described in your brother's book. So I'm wondering, how does that play out, and where you just led that? Is that where you're saying?
Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, well, yes. So if you look, for example, at the symbolism in Song of Songs, right? So in Song of Songs, there really is this celebration of the ecstatic aspect of sexuality, and in Song of Songs, the woman is a foreign woman, right? That's what it's suggested. It's suggested in the sense that she's suggested that she's dark, right? That she's dark, and she talks about how she's and so the idea of the Shulamite. So in the tradition, there's this notion that in the Song of Songs, he's talking about the Queen of Sheba. He's talking. It's a story. He's talking about the Queen of the South. And so there is this idea of being seduced by the let's say the foreign woman, and so there's that danger of, let's say, this kind of ecstatic. That's, I don't know, the danger, the reality of this ecstatic moving out of yourself, right? So kind of like, and so the moving out of yourself can be seen in terms of pleasure, in terms of this ecstatic moment, but it can also be seen as this kind of moving out, and it could also be idea of joining with the foreigner. So there's like, how can you say it? The idea of something which is exotic, right? The exotic, let's say. Okay. And then, like you said, there's also the idea of then the homemaking in terms of the internal. So the like you said, the mother, the all of this imagery is there. Now in Song of Songs, there's both too. Sometimes he talks about he calls her his sister in Song of Songs. So it seems like there's also this like interesting like relationship between like the very far and the very close, almost in a very off way almost.
Okay, I can see that.
So the idea is that you have to, in order to really get to the core of what sexuality is, you have to find a place where the two join together. And so where all the aspects of sexuality are kind of brought into a place. Like if you have them separated, then you have a problem. Because if you emphasize the pleasure aspect too much, right, then you actually will lose your seed, right? You'll waste your seed, and you will waste your time, you'll waste your energy, and you will lose your strength, right? That's one of the story. That's why the Samson story is so important. But it's also the idea of like having kids with look at the people that do that and what happens when they get women pregnant, and then they end up paying child support for like several women, and then their strength is taken away from them. It's not just like a literary trope. Like if you sleep around, it's going to catch up with you, and you're going to lose your strength, and it's gonna suck you dry, right? And you're not just that, but even if you don't have children with those women, they're going to float around you like, how can I say this? They're going to float around you, even in your mind, in your psyche, in your imagination, but even in your life, where they're going to be poking at your edges, and you're not going to be able to hold the center, and so it's like a real practical thing. It's not just like a flighty thing. And so you have, then you have this idea, like you said, of the homemaker, let's say, and the mother, where if you just focus on that, then it's almost like you're lacking an aspect you're lacking the ecstatic, right? You're lacking that which can bring you out of yourself, which can bring you further. And so it's almost like you can imagine, almost like in the communion, there's the bread and then there's the wine. And so it's like one is the bread, one is the wine, but you're supposed to have them together. You're supposed to take the wine and the bread together. And that's when you really have an image of paradise, let's say, is when you have a fruitful union, which produces fruit, produces offspring, but is also something which makes you transcend yourself, which kind of bonds you in an ecstatic way to the person. Because it's not just about pleasure, it's also about this kind of ecstatic moment.
So one is like practicality, like procreation and making children and propitiating the species, etc. And then there are ones like pleasure. And so if you have too much of the one, say like the practical elements, then you lose some of that intimacy, right, in a marriage, let's say.
Well, you'll lose the refreshing aspect. Like you'll lose the restfulness of it, right? And so it'll become work. Your relationship's just going to be work all the time, and you're going to see your relationship with your wife as work, as tiring, as an effort you've got to put in, a grind you've got to keep your nose to the grind all the time. And you can be faithful, but it's going to be work. Whereas if there's also this other aspect to it, then there are small moments of ecstatic union, which refresh your relationship, and then will kind of erase a lot of the little grit that gets accumulated, right? It can kind of wash it away. And so ultimately the idea is to have both. So, but if you have to be careful, because if you like read the church fathers, they'll tend to say, no, just procreation. Like, and you see it in monastic writings. They are like, sexuality is just for procreation. And the ecstatic aspect of sexuality is kept for God, basically, and so you're supposed to have this. But I think that's you always have to understand that as like you're reading a monastic, like you're not
AKA
reading
a monk.
someone. Exactly, you're not a monk. You're not a
Vows of
monk, and unless
celibacy.
you are, then what they're saying doesn't really completely apply to you.
But that
There has
also
to be
echoes the tension that St. Paul had too, right? In 1 Corinthians 7 and the chapters before and after that, where he's talking about, yeah, well, okay, I could see it this way, but if you're going to burn with passion, then it's better to do this. And he's really like, well, I'm not speaking the word of the Lord. I'm kind of processing right here. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But yeah, so you know what comes to mind, oddly enough, is an episode from Scrubs. Did you ever watch that show?
No.
Okay, so in the scene, it's basically a couple is trying to have a baby, and the wife is just taking it way too seriously. And she has a schedule, and they're about to get into bed, and she's like, okay, so this is the right time of the moon cycle and my cycle, and I've exercised and I've dieted in the right way, and I've hydrated 8.5 cups of water or whatever.
Yeah.
He's like, this isn't doing it for me, babe. And so it's like totally void of any intimacy or spontaneity or the wine, you could call it.
Yeah, and so it, like you said, it has to. There's something about if you how can I say this? If you're only being practical about it, like you said, if you're only doing it with this purpose, it's actually not going to happen. It's not going to work. Or it might work,
and that's what the guy said.
It's not going to work. And it's actually, and even if you end up doing it, it'll be difficult for unless, I mean, some women will get pregnant easily, but like if you're already having trouble getting pregnant, and then you're like, yeah, right, it's not going to give. It's just not going to happen. Sorry.
Yeah, good luck with that. And in the case of the episode, they like slow down and they're like, okay, maybe we'll do a date night first,
And then she does get pregnant, I imagine, at some point.
Yeah. So, yeah, et cetera, as far as the episode.
Well-wrapped
example goes.
Yeah. But so one of the important things that, like, the important reasons why Mathieu talks about that way, and a lot of people kind of miss why he uses the word recreation. He's doing it for and some people got annoyed by the term recreation because they felt like it's like recreation in the sense of, just hanging out, like just this idea of taking a vacation, so you're playing a game, right? But there's a more important aspect, which is that in Scripture, that aspect, or the recreational aspect, is actually part of recreation. It's how you resurrect things, and it's there in the stories. And so there are moments, and it happens especially in the story of Judah and Tamar. Like, that story is about that. It's about that. The Leveret is about that. The Leveret is about this, like, and the way that it's told in the story of Judah is especially about that, because Judah thinks he's sleeping with a prostitute, and by doing that, he's actually resurrecting his son. He's resurrecting his son's line, and so it doesn't justify what he did. He's actually blamable for what happened, but nonetheless, that's what happens. And so you can understand that. And that's why, again, I keep trying to get people to understand this. That's why the resurrection of Christ happens in Rome. That's why the resurrection of Christ is adjoining with the foreign woman. It's not. It can't be adjoining with Israel, at least not at the outset. And it had to manifest itself as adjoining with the foreign woman.
No, so when you say in Rome, you mean like in the Roman Empire, right? But it happened outside of the city of Jerusalem, right?
Christians, no, I mean resurrection, not just resurrection of his body. I mean the body of Christ. The coming up of the body of Christ had to happen in. So it has to first happen in the foreign land because it's a part of a new world. It's like the recreation of a world. It's not a continuation of the old world. It's a change. So when there's a change of worlds, think about it. Like think of places where there are changes of world in scripture. So the two spies go into the city. Where do they stay before that city is going to turn to change to the other side? They stay with a prostitute because that's just it's the same stuff. It's like for this shift to happen, there's something connected with that other side. And so it's like to resurrect, let's say, so you can imagine like so there's this famine in the world, right? And Jacob is about to die with his sons. And what saves him? What saves him is his son, Joseph, joining with the foreign woman, right? Joseph goes to Egypt, and that's how he resurrects the body of Jacob. And it's like you'll see it. It's just it's there everywhere in scripture. Mathieu like just really nailed it, like in terms of seeing a pattern that people doesn't seem like he's seen. Mathieu is like he didn't lay it out enough, like in my opinion. Like I wish he would have like just like, but he really wanted to write something which was like this beautiful, pure text, but he could have laid it out way more and showed you like, I'm not just making this stuff up, guys. It's everywhere, so that aspect, like the aspect of you could call the wine aspect or this it has a function. It has a function in this like refreshing of reality, compared to just feeding it, compared to just giving bread. It's like it's a turn, right? So you get drunk, you turn. It's like this turning, and then.
Yeah, I think your brother's book, and I'm not sure if I covered this in the 3-part review that I gave of him last year. That word recreation was super helpful for me because even at take the increment of a week and how Sabbath or the Sabbath is supposed to be the day of rest, the 7th day of creation, or recreation. So it's like instituting a mini flood. So you do things where you're turning in circles, you dance, you play music, you take naps, you do things that aren't productive, right? You do things that are pleasurable. You do things that are celebratory. Or pointless, that'd be the time to do it. And that was super helpful for me because
that word is perfect. Mathieu using the word pointless. Such a beautiful, every word he uses is so perfect. It's like, it's pointless. He's saying it doesn't have a center, right? It doesn't move into a point. It's not a pyramid. It's not any of those patterns. It's pointless. It's
right. It's not axiomatic, or it's like the horn without a point. So it's tying to music as recreative. Yeah. Oh, it made me want to play more music too, because I'm like, oh, that's what music is for. Oh, of course, really like took the edge off, because I tend to be an overthinker and work a lot, and so I found that part of your brother's book to be super refreshing.
Well, I'm happy. Yeah, I hope everybody reads that book.
Yeah. Now, the other thing too is that at first it frustrated me because I totally would sympathize with what you said. I wanted more, but in that sense, as an artist, sometimes that's the very best thing you could leave people with is wanting more.
Yeah,
because I just look at what it did for my.
I hope he. Yeah. We need to plead to him to write more. I plead to him all the time. I'm like, Mathieu, you need to write more, and he's like,
Speaking of prophets and prophecy, man, oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know, maybe. We'll see. Who knows? I'm on this farm now. He's on this farm. He's doing his farm thing. So
okay, well, farming has its importance as well in the grand scheme of the cosmos. And I just hope that maybe our sons with prophet names don't turn out quite like that, because it's a bit frustrating for me.
Yeah, no, I understand. But if we're just gonna finish, I just want to finish the whole sexuality.
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
But we do need to understand that sexuality is basically the image of how everything manifests, and so that's why St. Paul uses the relationship between male and female as being pattern of reality. And so like J.P. Marceau had he had such a great expression. And when he realized finally that it's head and body, like that's the structure of everything. And so you have a head, and then you have the potentialities that come together to manifest that head. And so it's like that's how everything works. And he said it's heads and bodies all the way down. And I was like, yes, that's the perfect way to describe it. And so, but the idea that all of reality is basically is always like a mini sexual union. It has a sexual structure, and that in the Old Testament, in Genesis, when it talks about heaven and earth, and then it is really, really exactly like the Chinese. It is male and female. It is masculine and feminine, and it is this coming together and finding places where it can connect and be fruitful in its connection. And so all the formulations are about finding places for the invisible influences, right? The seeds, the invisible seeds of the world to find proper bodies, and to manifest themselves in a proper way. And so that can become unbalanced. And that's when you get giants, you get monsters, you get all kinds of weird stuff. But how do we balance it? And so that's what the temple is. The temple is the building of a body to receive the glory. And so you can imagine it as a seat with a king. You can imagine it. There's all kinds of images which are about the joining of these two opposites. But it also does have a sexual connotation. It has sexual imagery in it as well. So we have to understand that sexuality is an image of how the cosmic reality manifests itself. It's one of the most succinct ones, actually, and that's why Christianity represents itself as this union of a bride with a groom, and that's how the world is saved. So you have a cosmic body which is joined to its head, or a cosmic bride which is joined to its groom, and that's how you have a well-balanced world.
And would you say that pattern of marrying the foreign or marrying the Gentile carries through with the Christ story as well?
Well, yeah, for sure. That's what the Samaritan story is about. And the Canaanite woman, so there's several images. Like there's the Samaritan. I've written about this if people are interested, because she's really not only the foreign woman, but she's the loose woman. Like the term that's used in Proverbs when it talks about the foreign woman is a word that could also mean like a loose woman, not just a foreign woman. And so the Samaritan that's who she is, right? She's had, you can count them. She's had 5 husbands, and she's had a 6th husband, which is not legitimate. So she's on 6, and then Christ is the 7th day. Christ is the one who he's the final day. He's the final day of creation. And so that's the day where he joins with the foreigner. That's
he's
the day
the
of
7th
rest.
husband.
That's right. That Christ is the 7th husband. And so
recreation.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's exactly what's going on in that story. There's no other way to see it. And it's about, and so there's that story. There's the story of the woman, the woman who's healed from bleeding. That's an important story because it's about an impure woman. And so the woman who was impure and is bleeding is also an image of the foreigner in the sense of the impurity. And so Christ makes her pure, right? So he makes her pure. And then he also makes the impure meats pure. And so all of this is all about joining with the foreigner. It's all these images of joining with the foreigner. And there's actually like a really interesting kind of little trope in there, which is that, when Christ comes into Jerusalem sitting on an ass, sitting on a donkey, even until today, if you read a rabbinical description of that prophecy, they'll say that the sitting on the donkey is the Messiah dominating the foreigner. That's what it is, right? Because he's sitting on the donkey, he's mastering the impure
animal. He's mounting
the impure animal who's coming into Jerusalem. And so they saw it as, of course, this king who's going to come and is going to defeat the foreigner in that way. But it ended up manifesting itself in a completely different way, which is that the bride of Christ ended up being, in large part, the foreign bride. It ended up being the one that crucified him. It ended up being the whore. It ended up being Rome. Like Rome is the one that ended up manifesting the body of the Messiah. And so it's like, it's just really fascinating. So you can imagine, like, and it's funny because you could think that they would see that that's what happens to Joseph in Israel, right? Joseph ends up dominating the foreign land, but he saves it, right? He saves Egypt. Joseph saves Egypt. He doesn't just dominate it in a negative way, like in like a emperor who comes and clamps down on the land. He becomes the head, next to the pharaoh, and then he saves Egypt. And so Christ, the Messiah coming in on the donkey, is the thing that people didn't seem to perceive, or even sometimes don't seem to perceive, is that it's not a negative thing. It's Christ saving the donkey. It's the Messiah saving the donkey. So, anyways, that's just a funny little trope that I see. That I see in that.
Boy, you're 3 for 3 right there. I'm so glad you said that. That's okay. So, in talking with the symbolism of sex, one would have to lead to the symbolism of contraception. So, what is the deeper meaning of contraception?
I mean, I think that contraception is definitely a problem. It's a problem because it's a cutting in half of what sexuality is, right? It's thinking that you can only have the pleasure, and so the image of contraception is actually an image of our whole society. I mean, it's an image of everything that is characteristic of who we are in terms of desiring only entertainment, desiring to be, not lacking all kinds of participative places. Like we don't have any. There's no participation left. Right? We don't have communities. We don't have groups. We have Netflix. We have games. We have, people talk about video games, but video games are not participative in the same way that a community is participative. It's still a game, and it's still part of this recreational world. And so I think that's what happened. And so you can understand it. So this is the mystery. So, Christ sometimes says things like when Christ says things like scandal must happen, right? And so scandal must happen, but woe to those by whom it happens. And I think that this is a moment where this is it. Like what's happening is not good. Our world being completely drunk on laughter and entertainment is definitely not a good thing. But it's still, if you look carefully, you'll see that it's probably also preparing. Like it's preparing for a resurrection. So it's not justifying it, but it nonetheless is. That's why we talk about the double inversion. That's why we talk about the clown turning the world back right side up. It's like, it's not about justifying these things, but it's about seeing that God's going to win in the end, folks. It's just, you can't stop that one, right? And so the way that it happens is sometimes surprising, and it's using death against death, and it's using the fragmentation against itself, and it's using this kind of weird decadent world against itself. And I think that contraception is definitely a problem. I don't think Christians should use contraception, at least not artificial contraception. Like I think that if you're going to, let's say, how can I say this? If you're going to practice a form of asceticism in order to not have children, then I think that's totally fine. Like I don't see that as a problem. But I don't think that artificial contraception it's just participating in. I mean, it's not gonna. I'm not saying like if you use contraception, you're going to go to hell or any stupid thing like that. But I'm just saying that there's a pattern in the world, and it's manifesting itself, and so that's one aspect of it. And if we engage with it, then we're part of that pattern.
So are you saying that condoms would be garments of skin?
That's for sure. That's what they are. They're like instead of circumcision, they're like, let's add another layer on top to actually stop it from doing what it's supposed to do. It's like
right. Yeah. And circumcision would be what, the mark of divine sonship, right? Or like a heavenly identity or something like that, right?
Well, I mean, circumcision is a removal of it's a removal of the outer garments. That's what it is. It's a moving into the inner aspect, and so it's revealing the inner aspect. You could say it that way. And so it's actually a form of unveiling, you could call it. And so, but it's an image of obviously moving into the temple. It's an image of the circumcision of the heart that St. Paul talks about ultimately, which is more important. I mean, physical circumcision is a ritual practice which had its purpose in terms of creating a pattern of being, but it has also to lead to something like the circumcision of the heart, which is a better understanding of reality.
Okay, and now
how Christians don't get circumcised, and that's also part of one of the reasons why. I mean, some Christians do, but let's say traditionally Christians weren't circumcised, and that's also part of their function as the foreigner who is also converted.
Oh, right. Because the circumcision is tied to Judaism, right?
I keep telling people like Christianity is a non-dual religion, and so you have to be able to deal with that. Like, if you're non-dual, if you believe that the world resolves itself in non-duality and an infinite God that isn't opposed to his creation, then these things have to resolve themselves, and the enemy has to be absorbed at some point. There has to be reconciliation for the world to actually find its resolution. So like the sheep has to lay down with the lion, but the foreigner also has to be reintegrated. Cain has to be reintegrated. Esau has to be reintegrated. All of these aspects of reality, all the, Samson has to be integrated. All the weird stuff in scripture, all the like weird patterns, all the strangeness, they have to be integrated. And if you look at the story of Christ, it's all there. Samson
I'm also thinking about the epistles and how, like in Galatians, even where they're beginning to talk about that with Peter and with Paul, right? One called to the Jews, one called to the foreigners.
That's right.
And they were already beginning to say, like, well, what do we expect them to do? Like ritualistically, circumcise, not circumcise, go through all of our traditional rituals, or like what is it? Yeah. Right. And so they were already beginning to decide practically what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really ends up being the story of Christianity, and the Galatians are important in terms of the idea, like we always forget, like sometimes who these people are, like the idea that they're the Romans and the Galatians. The Galatians were kind of like the barbarians. They were, they're the Gauls. They're the Galatians are the ancestors of the Celts. The Galatians are the same people as the Celts, as the Gauls, as that's what Galatian is. It's
interesting.
These are the people that we're talking about here, and so it's like, and it's very mysterious the way that the Gauls or the Celts converted super early to Christianity and had their kind of own edge of the world version of what Christianity was like. They had their kind of own version, like Gallic, this idea of a Gallic Christianity. So it's important to kind of understand that there's also this other kind of wild aspect to it's like there's Rome in the sense of Esau, but there's also even further out like these weird tribal guys that are also converting.
Yeah, right. Now I'm just wondering too, like, so whenever we are talking about, say, like procreation, sometimes it's referred to as seed, right? So a man's seed or a semen, like it being inhibited, like what are the deeper things happening whenever, say, like we're a contracepted people?
No, but I mean, there's just going to be lack of fruit. Like in practical terms, you're going to start to stop existing. It's very simple. It's not a very complicated
It's not a
thing. It's like
conundrum.
it's not a conundrum. If the seed doesn't get to its destination, then you're going to exist less, and then you're going to cease to exist, and then you're going to be invaded by the outside. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's very simple, and you also end up. This is the harder part that people don't understand, is that you're always giving seed to something. And so it's not like it doesn't matter, right? And so your seed is given to something. So if it's not given to your wife, then it ends up being given to the scapegoat, or given to, I don't know how else to say it, given to the wild aspect. And so it's like a culture of contraception is also a culture of pornography. Those two things are the same, because it's you're giving your seed to a succubus, like you're giving your seed to this phantasm, to a feminine phantasm. And so it's like those two things are manifestations of the same problem. And so it's not surprising. Like the way that it happened in our world is not surprising. Like I keep telling people, if you don't believe in incubi and succubi, you're an idiot, because they're everywhere. Like they're everywhere right now, And just because you see an image of a woman, like you see an image of a woman on a screen, is that you're not seeing that woman. Obviously, you have no connection with that person. It's an idol. It's an idol embodying a feminine phantasm. And so it's like pornography is just basically engaging with incubi and succubi. That's what it is. And so that's what happens in a world where the idea of giving seed isn't taken seriously, because it's not just about the actual. The analogy plays itself out, because it's also about attention. It's not just about the sexual act. It also ends up being about attention.
Like the seed of your ideas?
That's right. Your mind, your attention, your mental attention. What is it that I saw? There was a tweet that was going viral, and it was some guy saying, they were talking about pornography and how dangerous it is. And then the guy says, like, well, if you didn't have pornography, what would you think about all day? And I was like, there you go, dude. That's what he's saying. It's like your life can be wasted away if you give your attention to these phantasms. And it's not, you actually will be less productive in life. You will have less ideas. You will be less engaged in your community. All of this is going to happen. So it's not just about the sexual act with your spouse.
It's robbing your productivity.
Yes, it is. It actually is.
No, that just makes me think of, okay, so in the productivity genre, because like channels like Better Ideas, or like what's his name? Anyway, so huge genre, right? Maybe it's like a subsection of the business genre of YouTube videos or articles or books. A big part of that right now that's popular is called NoFap. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's because they realize that, without even knowing, they realize that, this stuff that we talk about, us religious people, we're talking about reality. Not just talking about like arbitrary moral things. We're actually talking about reality. And you're going to come to the same conclusion that we are, but you're going to have to get through hell to get there. You're going to go through hell, and now you're going to realize that there's a reason why these things were talked about the way they were in the past. Mm-hmm. And so exactly, if people are noticing that if to give in to masturbation, that it's going to take away your attention. It's going to make you a loser. It's going to make you like someone who has no drive, has no direction, is just and so it's real. It's not like I said, it's not but contraception is part of that too. It actually is. Because the thing about having children is that it is transformative. It's the kind of transformation that you wouldn't want if you're looking just for pleasure, and that you can only experience once it happens, right? I can tell you that the experience of like holding your child is something that will like bring you in a transcendent moment that will completely transform you. But you can't know that. You have to experience it, because there's a lot of pain which goes with it. There's a lot of suffering which comes with having children, but the joys are beyond description.
Transcendent joy through suffering, through sacrifice. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the idea of like the single guy, who's like in his 40s and isn't married and doesn't have children and who doesn't have any direction, it's all connected together. But not just that, like the couple that decides not to have children and then like get a dog and then 2 dogs, and then their whole life is about their dogs, and then they, it's like their dogs are and so it's like, and it becomes a caricature and a parody of reality, and their whole life becomes a joke. And what I'm saying is true.
I'm holding my tongue right now. I have several people that just came to mind.
So it's like this stuff is actually talking about reality, and so people can knock at the idea that contraception is a problem. They can knock at it, but look at the fruits. It's like you could in the 60s you could say that, but now I don't know, man. Look at the fruits.
Well, okay, so like take the NoFap, right, which is basically like don't masturbate, right? Don't spill your seed, because what these guys realized is that they want to start a business. They want to be like Elon Musk. They want to write books and come up with ideas and be an entrepreneur. And so in order to produce, they can't spill their seed because that's wasting away their productivity and their energy.
Yeah. It's wasting their attention, and it's wasting their, like you said, their energy. Everything's going there. So they have to hold their seed and direct it towards, and they end up acting in a ritual manner where they will be monks, like not really, but they'll practice a form of asceticism, because they realize that you can direct by doing that. You can focus your energy and your attention on a higher goal, let's say. So, but it's utilitarian, which is fine. But if you follow the logic to its end, you get to an actual monk who is reaching towards God and is holding his seed completely in order to have this ecstatic union with the divine and be transformed and being deified. It's like that's the finality of the NoFap thing. They can't ride their logic to the end. They just think of getting their million or whatever, getting their Lamborghini, which whatever, but it's still showing you that pattern that, like you said, this ascesis, ascetic practice there's a reason why we direct our seed, let's say.
So they're like removing the contraception in order to produce.
What do you mean? Like they're directing their seed towards the goal. They're directing their seed towards a goal that they find worthy, and so, but so yeah. But it's. I mean, it's funny because I think it's probably the first time I publicly kind of talk about this way.
Oh, same here. But it's important, man. Like it absolutely is.
Yeah, but then you understand why traditional Christians tend to not encourage contraception or discourage contraception.
Well, I come from a generation, at least where I grew up, the family that I was born into, the culture that I lived in, we didn't talk about sex ever. It was totally taboo. So I learned it from my friends, and I mean, God knows where they learned it, right? And so I picked up a bunch of, how would you call it, like bad habits or incorrect patterns of how to appropriate these things. And in my response now being an adult, now having kids, now being a leader and trying to show people the better way, at least as far as I understand it to this point. I'm kind of like the pendulum swing where I'm like, let's talk about it, because like if we're not talking about it in the private space of the home, then perhaps YouTube would be a more appropriate place because like the subject needs to get discussed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for that, I thank you that you're the brave one to dive into this topic.
Yeah, it's funny. It's actually, I don't mind. There's not a lot of things that I mind talking about. It's just that I just want to make sure that I just want to make sure that it's understood by people. And so, but I think so. I think that if I think about what we talked about, I think people can kind of see, what it is we're talking about, that it's more than just about a kind of finger wagging or a kind of moralizing. It actually is about just how your life lays itself out and how how if you want certain things, then there are certain realities you have to, and if you give in to certain things, then there's going to be some results and you can't avoid them. They're just part of how,
and
glass falling. Or
I was looking into say the Bible, and I think it's a very sexual document. I mean, you brought up several examples, but I mean, even in the language, the word is sperma.
Yeah,
it's sperma. It's talking about sperm. So it's saying like, you want the seed inside of you.
About sperm, but
okay.
These are all analogically linked.
Speaking.
It's like these are all analogically linked. That the seed, the word, and because the word sperm is basically just seed, like it's just seed.
Right.
And so that there's a relationship between. So like for example, like even in Latin, what is it? Justin Martyr talks about the logos spermaticos. And so he talks about the logos, the hidden seed in the world. So the logo, which is hidden as a seed in reality. So everything has a hidden seed that you can discover. So it's definitely, it's linking all of those together. That's for sure. Like you have to be able to see across the different levels of reality if you're going to read scripture, or else none of it's going to make sense. It's going to just be arbitrary.
Right.
But it ends up, everything in scripture can be seen through sexuality as a lens, which is why we come to the image of the bride and the bridegroom in Christ.
Okay. Why don't we end on that one? Because you talked about Eve earlier, you talked about Mary or the two Marys, and then you also had this cool thing where you're talking about the architecture of the church and how Mary is a part of the positionality of that. And then, of course, we're most recently getting into the symbolism of sex and the union of male and female. So I'm wondering, how would you tie those things together in the light of procreation? Like, what is this all producing in the Christian story, ultimately?
So, I mean, in the Christian story, you have a joining of all the elements together. It's always that's always what Christianity is doing. And so there's an aspect of, let's say, the joining of Christ and his bride, and the joining of the male and female, which is the creating of a body, right? So it's a family. You can imagine it like that. So you're united to your wife, and then you extend your body, right? You have kids, and then you become bigger, right? You have more body, and so you can also see that as fruit. So there's this fruitfulness which is there, and at the same time, there's also the ecstasy or the ecstatic transformation of the person, and so then there's mystical discussion of being one body, of being one with your spouse, of transcending your duality, in union with her. And so that transcending of your duality is the ecstatic jump. It's like it's an ecstatic jump from the multiple to the unitive, right? It's emergence. It's this jump from multiplicity to one. It's like this mysterious thing, and it happens as an ecstasy, and it happens as this. So there's a productive aspect to it. There's also an ecstatic aspect to it, and it is an image of the mystical union and the mystical transformation of the person. So what we have to be careful that we also have to see things in the right order, and so it's an image. It ends up being a way to participate in the pattern, but it has to lead higher. And so the ultimate image of sexuality is the image of the person united with God. That is the highest version. And our sexuality should be an image of that and aim towards that. And so there's actually a trope in Christian, like Orthodox, let's say, life, which is that people who are married, in their love for each other and in their sexual union, they end up moving towards what they call a white marriage, which is actually an abstinent marriage. And so they actually end up becoming monks in their marriage after they've had kids and after they've procreated. They become a monastic union, and they're a monastic union where their sexual union is happening vertically with Christ or with God. And so the idea is that sexuality ultimately leads to this union, and so it's for a lot of people, it can seem like it's almost like counterintuitive. It's like, okay, so sexuality leads to abstinence, like, okay, I don't understand, but it's about fulfilling and directing, right? So it's like this union of man and female, and man and woman, and then ultimately directing your gaze up, and then moving in that direction. It's the image of the, it's kind of like the image of, I like this image actually, the image of like the kung fu master who is such a good fighter that he never fights. He doesn't have to fight anymore. He's actually the best. He's actually such a good fighter that he lives in a place of peace where he doesn't need to fight. And so the purpose of kung fu is actually not to fight, is actually to transcend fighting. And so it's like there's something about that in the way that the Christian sexuality manifests itself in its story. And I mean, I'm not saying I'm not there. Like I'm be careful when I say things. I'm not necessarily using myself as an example, but I see stories of these kind of luminous couples, and it's impressive. But I don't know if a lot of us are able to get there.
Did you ever watch the movie about Gandhi?
No.
Okay, so Gandhi and his wife, they did perhaps like the Indian or Hindu version of that. And it's just kind of funny because after Gandhi is assassinated, or excuse me, no, the wife actually passes first. So right before the wife passes, she says, "Oh yeah, so we took part in this tradition, although we didn't always do the best job of it." Where they were intended to have a waning sexual life and a rising spiritual union, you could call it. And they're like, yeah.
But they didn't necessarily.
He wasn't always the best at that.
Yeah. Well,
just to draw upon his profound spirit and his in combination of his humanity as well.
Yeah, there's some of that in kind of Orthodox lingo. There's some funny jokes that appear in the Orthodox world about that. And so there's a joke that I was told by someone one time to kind of help you understand this reality, which is that it's a young couple that are going to get married. And so they meet with this like babushka, who's this like older lady who's going to kind of tell them how it is, like how it works in the church and how it has to happen.
How interesting.
Right. And so the babushka tells them that so when it is that they can have sexual intercourse, right? So she says, well, you can't do it on a Friday because that's a fasting day, right? Because Wednesday and Fridays are fasting days. So you can't do it on a Friday because that's a fasting day. And so you can't do it on Thursday because it's the eve of a fast, right? And so you can't do it on Wednesday because Wednesday is a fast.
Okay.
And you can't do it on Tuesday because Tuesday is the eve of a fast.
He uses a yeah, right.
Right. And so you can't do it on, and then it was like there's reason for so you can't do it on Sunday because Sunday is the Holy Communion, and Sunday is the liturgy, and you can't do it on Saturday because it's the day before communion. And then you also, and so then the couple are like,
Monday.
So we can do it on Monday. And then the babushka says, yeah, but there's an old tradition according to which, Monday is dedicated to the holy angels. So it's like a bodiless day. So you can't do it on Monday. And so the kids are like, okay. So like, they're like, like, what do we do?
What are we getting into?
Right. And so they ask the babushka, so like, is that what you did with your own husband? Like when you got married? She's like, nah, not at all. Like we didn't know about any of this stuff. Right. So it's like, yeah, this is it. But then like people are going to do what they're going to do,
Right. I have to say, like in my inquiry of orthodoxy, I'm pretty impressed with like the highest the highest levels of divinity, but then the practicality of humanity. And it's like there's a place for all of it.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like when you visit an Orthodox church, you're always surprised at how both extremely, let's say, liturgical it is, but also how weirdly informal it always ends up being at the same time. Like this strange moment. It's like there's kids like roaming around and there's like, there's always this kind of organic informality, but because also if there's no seats, especially because then there's like people kind of shuffling and standing and coming in and lighting candles and
right.
And so it's like during it's like this whole thing that's going on, but at the same time it still has a kind of dance to it, a kind of formal dance to it. So
yeah, totally. And it's like in my mind at least, and it's like it has probably the highest structure, the highest order, the highest levels of divinity built into it at the same time. Something that isn't all that clear to me in your description is you described the hierarchy and you described the one and the many, or the love, right? But then you're also talking about logic or the logos and the word. I'm wondering, it's not clear to me what the distinction of those two things, like say love and logos, is. Like, so maybe could you help me out with what are they and like what are the distinction between them?
The distinction between love and logos.
Mm-hmm.
So you could understand love is the binding, right? So love is the binding of things together. Okay. And so you can understand it like in our case, it's like we are bound in love into the logos. So multiplicity is bound in love towards a transcendent essence or a transcendent identity, and which ends up being, a divine energy ultimately, which ends up being a you could call it like a seed in God from all eternity, something like that. And so that's what it is. And so the being, that's why the idea is that like God is love in the sense that that which binds the persons of the Trinity together is God. Like also,
okay. Mm-hmm.
It's hard. I really hate talking about Trinitarian stuff. You've probably noticed, but
right.
Maybe a way to help you understand.
That's certainly helpful. I appreciate that. And you know what? I think that's a good place to end right there, actually.
Yeah, you got me talking for almost 2 hours.
I know. It feels like we kicked into another gear like midway through. And
yeah, but no, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I really like talking to you.
Likewise.
So thanks for being involved in the Symbolic World. Like I'm really excited about just about you and James and all the moderators and JP and all these people that have kind of stepped up and are being more involved in not just like watching my videos, but actually kind of becoming symbolic thinkers and influencing others as well. That's what I wanted from the beginning. Like to me, this is not about me or it's not about my brother. It's about changing reality, and we need like a kind of a movement or something that that we're all working together towards a similar cause. So I I really appreciate what you're doing.
You're absolutely welcome. I mean, it's a head and it's body all the way down.
That's
Right? But I feel like it's exciting, and it's also a privilege to be part of, like, how would you say it, like the materialization of the seed that you sown with the symbolic world, and just really unleashing something that was like a potential that was waiting to be realized or actualized. Is any other updates you want to leave people with?
I'm hoping that this year is going to be like a year of major change, a major transition in terms of what I'm doing. Because people know that I had this weird loop where I got flooded and got kicked out of it was kind of in this strange floodland for a year and a half. So now I'm back in my house, and I feel like I'm gaining some stability and some ground to act upon. And so there are a lot of projects in the works. And so the website, redoing the whole website, having a forum, more involvement, that's happening. There's going to be like a French version of the Symbolic World with JP Marceau and Christian Roy and a few others. Brodeur, I forget his first name. Sorry. There are a few people that have been writing on the Symbolic World that are actually francophones, and so they'll be like writing content in French. And so there's that. And there's really a lot of stuff. And some projects with Neil deGrade as well that I'm really excited about, and Nicholas Kotar.
Awesome.
And then there's God's Dog, which is coming out this summer in theory, the graphic novel. And that's going to be it really is a diving into a story version of all the symbolic patterns that we've been talking about. And so I think, at least for the Symbolic World people, I think it's going to be, at least for them, it's going to be a treat, because some things we've never talked about that are going to appear in the story that some of the patterns that we've actually never explicitly talked about, which are there in the story. So it'll be fun.
Nice. Awesome. I have one more postscript quick question.
All right, go for it.
Will you, Jonathan Pageau, on the air, recorded, publicized, will you set the record straight? Is it Pageauian or is it Pageauvian with a V?
It can be Pageauvian, because where does the V come from? Right? I don't even know where does it come from, because if you're gonna have it has to be like an Ian added to the end of the word. It seems like grammatically it should be Pageauian. Okay. But am I against you if I say Pageauian, or am I against JB?
Well, so would you rather it just emerge from the bottom up, and whichever most popular one after a year or two is the one we go with?
That's right.
Or do you want to set the record straight?
I'll let the people decide. But it seems like grammatically it should be Pageauian.
Well, let the records be set straight.
All right.
I think it's Pageauvian with a V.
All right, okay.
Because it has strong consonant, right? It has more of a distinction, demonstrative effect. Because Pageauian makes it sound like it's, I don't know, like a elementary school playground or something.
It doesn't sound as good. I agree. In terms of sonority, it's weaker, but it's probably more grammatically correct.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Derek.
I look forward to working with you in all these other respects. The best to you and your family, and may each of us have a blessed marriage and set a date night on the calendar.
All right, good call. All right, bye-bye, Derek.
Okay, take care.
Bye.